The massive observation deck of Station Omega floated silently in the void between star systems, its sensors reaching across thousands of light years to monitor the developing civilizations scattered throughout the galaxy. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Federation had watched over younger species, guiding them carefully into the cosmic community. When they proved ready for contact, Commander Rilak adjusted the holographic display with practiced ease, his four arms moving in perfect coordination as he examined the latest reports from Sector 7 Alpha. The small blue planet orbiting a yellow star had been flagged for observation centuries ago when its inhabitants first discovered fire. Now, according to the sensors, they had achieved nuclear fusion and were beginning to venture beyond their home world. Another routine emergence, Rilak muttered to his aide, Lieutenant Voss. Their technology follows the standard progression. Chemical rockets, primitive satellites, basic fusion drives. Nothing remarkable. The aide nodded, pulling up additional data streams. The species calls themselves humans. They have established several colonies on nearby planets and moons. Standard expansion pattern for a Type 1 civilization. What neither officer understood was that human expansion differed fundamentally from every other species the Federation had encountered. Where other races expanded cautiously, testing each step and consulting with home governments, humans launched themselves into space with a reckless determination that bordered on insanity. They didn't expand because it was safe or profitable. They expanded because something deep in their nature demanded it. The first warning signs appeared 3 months later. Human vessels, crude by Federation standards but surprisingly numerous, began appearing in star systems marked as Federation reserves. These were regions specifically set aside for future colonization by established member species, clearly marked with beacon signals that any spacefaring civilization should recognize. They're ignoring the territorial markers, Lieutenant Voss reported, confusion evident in his voice. The humans have established mining operations on 6 different worlds in the Kepler Reserve. Commander Rilak frowned as he studied the tactical display. Perhaps they don't understand our marking system. Send a standard first contact probe, establish basic communication protocols, and explain the situation. The probe launched within hours, its advanced translation matrix prepared to decode human language and establish peaceful dialogue. It approached the largest human mining facility on Titan 7, broadcasting standard Federation greeting sequences on all frequencies. The human response came faster than expected. Their crude communications array sent back a simple message that the probe's computer translated immediately. Unknown vessel. Identify yourself and state your intentions. This is Captain West of the mining station New Denver. We mean no harm, but we'll defend ourselves if threatened. Commander Rilak studied the translation with growing puzzlement. The humans had immediately assumed a defensive posture despite the probe's obviously peaceful approach. Their message contained references to self-defense and potential threats, concepts that seemed bizarrely out of place in a first contact scenario. Send a clarification message, Rilak ordered. Explain that we are the Galactic Federation, that this system is reserved territory, and that they must evacuate immediately to avoid complications. The human response arrived 6 hours later, and its content sent shockwaves through the observation station. Instead of the expected compliance or negotiation request, the humans had replied with a firm refusal followed by something unprecedented, a counterproposal. Federation representatives, the message began. We acknowledge your claim to this system but cannot comply with immediate evacuation. Our people have invested 3 years establishing this facility. We propose a meeting to discuss territorial boundaries and possible compensation arrangements. Our government is prepared to negotiate in good faith. Commander Rilak stared at the message in disbelief. No emerging species had ever responded to Federation authority with anything resembling defiance. The standard pattern involved immediate submission followed by grateful acceptance of Federation guidance. These humans seemed to believe they could negotiate with a civilization thousands of years more advanced than their own. They don't understand the situation, Lieutenant Voss suggested. Perhaps they think we're another species like themselves. Should we demonstrate our technological superiority to clarify matters? The commander considered this option carefully. Standard procedure called for a show of force when dealing with stubborn emerging civilizations. A single Federation cruiser could devastate an entire planet, making negotiation unnecessary. But something about the human response troubled him. Over the following weeks, more reports arrived from across the sector. Human vessels were appearing everywhere, always armed, always ready to fight despite being hopelessly outmatched by any potential threat they might encounter. Their expansion continued regardless of Federation warnings, and their settlements grew more numerous each day. The breaking point came when human colonists began terraforming operations on 3 worlds simultaneously, including one planet that the Centauri had specifically requested for their own expansion. The Centauri delegation arrived at Station Omega in a state of barely controlled fury. "These humans are openly defying galactic law," Ambassador Thek declared, his crystalline form pulsing with angry red light. They were warned to cease their illegal activities and responded by accelerating them. The High Council must take action. Commander Rillick found himself in an impossible position. His duty required him to enforce Federation law, but something about the human behavior pattern suggested they were operating from completely different assumptions than any species the Federation had previously encountered. The final report he submitted to the High Council contained a warning that would prove prophetic. The humans appear to view territorial disputes as matters for negotiation rather than submission. They consistently respond to threats with preparations for self-defense, rather than compliance. This species may require unconventional diplomatic approaches. The High Council's response came within days. A formal declaration of war was issued against humanity, citing their repeated violations of galactic law and their refusal to accept Federation authority. The declaration concluded with a statement that would haunt the galaxy for decades to come. The human species represents a threat to galactic order and must be brought into compliance through whatever means necessary. 3. Federation battle groups received orders to proceed to the human home system and establish control. The estimated duration of operations was listed as 2 weeks, with minimal casualties expected on both sides. As the Federation warships powered up their faster-than-light drives and departed for Earth, Commander Rillick remained at his post, monitoring long-range sensors with growing unease. The humans were doing something unprecedented. Instead of fleeing or hiding, they were mobilizing every available vessel and heading directly toward the approaching Federation fleet. No species in galactic history had ever responded to overwhelming military force with a direct attack. The humans seemed determined to fight a battle they couldn't possibly win. For reasons that made no sense to anyone in the Federation command structure, the galaxy was about to learn that some powers couldn't be understood until it was too late to avoid the consequences of that ignorance. Deep space trembled as 3 massive Federation cruisers dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. Their hulls gleamed with the advanced alloys of a civilization that had conquered the stars before humanity had discovered agriculture. Admiral Thren stood in the command center of the flagship Dominant, his 6 eyes scanning tactical displays that showed the primitive human home system spread out before his fleet. "Scan results confirm intelligence reports," his tactical officer announced. "The 3rd planet shows heavy industrialization but limited defensive capabilities. We detect approximately 40 vessels of various sizes moving to intercept our approach." Admiral Thren's mandibles clicked in what his species considered mild amusement. 40 ships against his battle group represented the kind of numerical disadvantage that usually resulted in immediate surrender. His own flagship alone carried enough firepower to sterilize a continent, while the escort cruisers could eliminate entire fleets of primitive vessels without sustaining damage. "Begin standard pacification protocols," he ordered. "Broadcast surrender. Demands on all frequencies. Give them 6 hours to comply before we begin orbital bombardment." What happened next violated every assumption the Federation had made about human behavior. Instead of requesting negotiations or time to consider terms, the human fleet accelerated toward the Federation vessels at maximum burn. Their primitive fusion drives left glowing trails across the darkness as 40 mismatched ships charged directly at 3 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. "Admiral," the communications officer reported with obvious bewilderment, "the humans are broadcasting a response to our surrender demand." "Display it," Thren commanded, expecting to see the standard plea for mercy or offer of conditional surrender. Instead, a stern-faced human female appeared on the main screen. Her uniform was simple compared to Federation dress standards, and her vessel's bridge looked almost primitive, but her voice carried absolute determination as she spoke. "Federation forces, this is Captain Rose of the Earth Defense Fleet. Your demand for surrender is rejected. We will not allow hostile forces to threaten our homeworld. All vessels, attack formation 7. Show them what humans do when someone tries to take our home." Admiral Thren stared at the transmission in complete confusion. The human commander had just ordered an attack against impossible odds with the same calm confidence he might have used to order breakfast. Her entire fleet was rushing toward certain destruction, and she seemed genuinely to believe they could win. "Sir?" The tactical officer's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Should we engage the human vessels or wait for them to reconsider?" The admiral hesitated. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered a species that responded to overwhelming force with immediate attack. Every rational civilization recognized when resistance was futile and chose survival over meaningless destruction, the human vessels opened fire while still at maximum range, their primitive weapons completely ineffective against Federation shields. Nuclear missiles detonated harmlessly against energy barriers designed to withstand stellar radiation. Kinetic projectiles bounced off hull plating that could survive passage through a star's corona. "Return fire," Admiral Thren ordered, still expecting the humans to retreat once they realized their weapons were useless. "Disable their engines, but avoid destroying them completely. We need survivors for questioning." The Federation weapons were precise instruments of controlled destruction, designed to minimize casualties while demonstrating overwhelming superiority. Energy beams lanced out from the 3 cruisers, each shot calculated to disable rather than destroy. Several human vessels lost power and began drifting helplessly through space, but the remaining ships didn't retreat. Instead, they did something that sent shockwaves through the Federation command crew. They accelerated even faster toward the enemy fleet, abandoning all pretense of conventional combat. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice rose with alarm, "the humans are on collision courses. They're not trying to escape or regroup, they're trying to ram us?" Admiral Thren watched in horrified fascination as Captain Rose's flagship, the Defiance, aimed directly at his own vessel despite taking heavy damage from Federation weapons. Her ship was venting atmosphere and trailing debris, but it continued accelerating toward the Dominant with suicidal determination. "Emergency evasive maneuvers," he commanded, but the massive Federation cruiser couldn't match the desperate agility of the smaller human vessel. The Defiance struck the Dominant's port section with devastating force, its nuclear reactors detonating on impact. The explosion tore through both ships, destroying the human vessel completely while crippling the Federation flagship. Admiral Thren found himself thrown against his command chair as artificial gravity failed and emergency systems struggled to contain the damage, but the nightmare wasn't over. 3 more human vessels followed Captain Rose's example, ramming themselves into Federation ships with complete disregard for their own survival. 1 escort cruiser lost main power when a human cargo hauler detonated its entire fuel supply against the enemy's engine section. "Damage report," Thren gasped as emergency lighting flickered across his ruined bridge. "Heavy casualties across all vessels," his aide reported. "The Dominant is barely spaceworthy. The cruiser Triumphant has lost propulsion and life support. The humans destroyed themselves, but they've crippled our entire battle group." Admiral Thren stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The human fleet was gone, completely destroyed, but they had inflicted damage that should have been impossible given their technological disadvantage. His own forces were so badly damaged that they would need months of repairs before returning to combat status. The few surviving human vessels that hadn't participated in the ramming attacks were broadcasting on all frequencies. Their messages weren't pleas for mercy or offers of surrender. Instead, they were warnings directed at their homeworld. Tell everyone what happened here. Tell them the Federation can be hurt. Tell them we made them bleed. Sir, the communications officer said quietly, we're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld. The face that appeared on screen was older than Captain Rose, with gray hair and lines that spoke of a lifetime spent making difficult decisions. This human wore different insignia and spoke with the authority of high command. Federation forces, this is Admiral Park of Earth Defense Command. We monitored your engagement with our forward fleet. Captain Rose and her people died well, but they were just the beginning. If you want Earth, you'll have to come through 50 more fleets, just like hers. We're not going to surrender, we're not going to negotiate, and we're not going to run away. This is our home, and we'll die before we let you have it. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Thran alone with the wreckage of his assumptions about human nature. His battle group had won the engagement, but the victory felt hollow. The humans had fought like no species he had ever encountered, treating certain death as an acceptable price for inflicting damage on their enemies. His report to the High Council would be difficult to write. How could he explain that 40 primitive vessels had nearly destroyed 3 advanced cruisers? How could he describe an enemy that became more dangerous when losing rather than less? As emergency repairs began on his crippled flagship, Admiral Thran realized that the Federation had made a terrible mistake. They had declared war on humans, thinking they understood what that meant. Now, surrounded by the wreckage of his fleet and the debris of vessels whose crews had chosen death over defeat, he began to understand that nobody in the galaxy really knew what humans were capable of when their backs were against the wall. The war was just beginning, and already it was nothing like anyone had expected. The Federation High Council chamber had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, but never had its crystalline walls resonated with such fury as they did when Admiral Thran's battle report reached the assembled representatives, 12 species. Sought in judgment, their various forms unified by a single emotion, outrage at the humiliation suffered by their forces. 3 cruisers crippled by primitive savages, snarled Ambassador Krell, his reptilian features twisted with disgust. The entire galaxy watches as our most advanced vessels limp home with hull breaches and casualty lists longer than some wars produce. This cannot stand. Admiral Kovan, newly appointed to replace the disgraced Thran, stood before the council, with the bearing of a warrior who had never known defeat. His species had conquered 17 star systems before joining the Federation, and his tactical genius was legendary throughout the military hierarchy. The previous engagement suffered from underestimation of human irrationality, Korvan reported, his voice carrying the confidence of absolute certainty. My battle fleet consists of 12 dreadnoughts, 30 cruisers, and over 200 support vessels. No species in galactic history has withstood such force. The Council voted unanimously for total war, not just the elimination of human military capabilities, but the complete subjugation of their species as an example to any other civilization that might consider defying Federation authority. The humans would learn that challenging galactic order carried consequences beyond their imagination. Admiral Korvan's armada emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their weapons charged and targeting systems locked onto every human installation in the Sol system. The sight should have broken the spirit of any rational species. Hundreds of massive warships arranged in the geometric precision that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 millennia, but the human response defied every prediction made by Federation strategists. Instead of the organized military fleet they expected to face, the sensors detected thousands of vessels of every conceivable type converging on their position. Cargo haulers bristled with improvised weapons. Passenger liners had been gutted and converted into missile platforms. Even small civilian craft appeared to be loaded with nuclear devices. Admiral, his tactical officer reported with barely concealed confusion. "We count over 3,000 human vessels approaching our position. The majority appear to be civilian ships with military modifications." Corvin studied the tactical display with growing unease. The approaching human fleet looked nothing like a proper military formation. Their vessels moved in chaotic patterns that violated every principle of space combat. Their communications were undisciplined chatter rather than organized command. Structures and their weapon signatures suggested they were using everything from mining explosives to improvised nuclear devices. "Begin the attack," he ordered. "Eliminate the largest concentrations first, then work systematically through the smaller groups." The battle that followed became known throughout the galaxy as the Soul Massacre, though historians would argue for centuries about which side truly suffered the greater loss. Federation weapons tore through human vessels with horrifying efficiency, each energy beam or missile salvo destroying entire ships. But the humans refused to break. Where any rational species would have retreated after losing half their fleet, the humans pressed their attack with increasing desperation. Cargo ships rammed Federation dreadnoughts. Passenger liners detonated themselves against cruiser hulls. Small fighter craft flew directly into Federation weapon emplacements, their pilots choosing certain death over the possibility of enemy survival. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice carried a note of panic that Corvin had never heard before, "we've lost the Dreadnought Crusher. A human cargo vessel loaded with antimatter charges rammed our forward section. The entire ship is gone." "Admiral," Corvin watched his tactical display in growing horror as his overwhelming numerical advantage began to erode. The humans were dying by the thousands, but each death seemed to inspire greater fury in the survivors. Their attacks became more reckless and more effective as desperation replaced caution. The human admiral, who commanded the defense from a converted mining platform, called out to his dying fleet with words that Federation translators would never forget. "Remember, every ship we take down with us is one less to threaten our children. Make them pay for every mile of space between here and Earth." By the battle's end, Admiral Corvin had achieved his objective. The human home fleet was completely destroyed. Earth's orbital defenses were eliminated, and the planet lay defenseless before his surviving vessels. But the cost had been staggering. 60% of his battle fleet was destroyed or too damaged to continue fighting. Worse still, the humans had somehow evacuated millions of civilians during the battle. Sensor readings detected hundreds of small vessels that had escaped during the chaos, scattering across the galaxy like seeds carried by stellar winds. The conquest of Earth itself proved to be another nightmare entirely. The planet's population refused to surrender despite the presence of Federation occupation forces. Guerrilla attacks erupted across every continent. Industrial facilities were sabotaged by their own workers. Even children threw rocks at Federation patrols, showing the same suicidal defiance that had characterized their military forces. "We control every major city and military installation," reported Colonel Drew to Admiral Corvin during the occupation's third month. "But the humans won't accept defeat. They keep fighting even when resistance is pointless." The Admiral was beginning to understand that conquering humanity meant something different than conquering any other species. The humans didn't fight for territory or resources or even survival in the conventional sense. They fought for something the Federation had never encountered before, the right to remain themselves. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, scattered human refugees were making their presence known in ways that sent shockwaves through Federation space. Commander Rex, leading a group of survivors aboard a converted cargo ship called New Hope, struck Federation supply depots with a fury that terrified veteran soldiers. His crew consisted of teachers, engineers, farmers, and shop owners who had learned to fight because the alternative was extinction. They hit Federation installations with attacks that combined desperate courage with intimate knowledge of how civilized beings thought and planned. "We don't have the numbers to win battles," Rex told his exhausted crew as they prepared for another raid, "but we can make them afraid to leave their bases. We can make them understand that conquering humanity means fighting humans everywhere, forever." The Federation had expected to fight an army and instead found themselves hunting ghosts. Human survivors appeared wherever they were least expected, struck without warning and vanished into the vast emptiness of space. Each attack was small in scale but massive in psychological impact. What had begun as a simple police action to discipline an upstart species had become the largest military mobilization in Federation history. Thousands of ships that should have been exploring new worlds or protecting established colonies were instead chasing human survivors through hostile space. The galaxy was beginning to burn, and nobody seemed to know how to put out the fire that humanity had lit with their refusal to accept the natural order of things. The asteroid field that had once been a peaceful mining region now housed the largest concentration of human survivors outside of Federation prison camps. General Hayes floated in the zero-gravity command center carved from the heart of a massive space rock surrounded by displays showing the positions of his scattered fleet. 87 vessels, all that remained of humanity's military might, faced Federation forces that numbered in the thousands. "Sir, we're receiving reports from the Alpha Squadron," Lieutenant Morris announced from her position at the communications console. "They successfully destroyed the Federation supply depot at Ross 128, but we lost 3 ships in the process." Hayes nodded grimly as another set of markers disappeared from his tactical display. Every victory cost them resources they couldn't replace. Every successful raid meant fewer ships for the next mission. The mathematics of their situation were simple and brutal. They were being slowly erased from existence, one engagement at a time, but the general had learned something about mathematics during his years of fighting the Federation. Numbers only told part of the story when dealing with humans who had nothing left to lose. "What's the status of Operation Starfall?" he asked his chief of staff. "Teams are in position around 7 Federation worlds," came the reply. Commander Webb reports that the vegan system is particularly vulnerable. Their orbital habitats depend entirely on automated supply runs from their industrial moon. Hayes studied the holographic display of Federation space, noting the red markers that indicated human infiltration teams. His people had learned to use the galaxy's own infrastructure against the Federation, turning trade routes into death traps and peaceful systems into battlefields. The plan was desperate but necessary. If the Federation wanted to hunt humans across the galaxy, they would discover that humans could hunt back. "Execute Starfall," Hayes ordered. "All teams begin simultaneous attacks. Make them understand that their own worlds aren't safe anymore." Across Federation space, the carefully coordinated assault began. Commander Webb's team struck the Vegan Confederacy's primary industrial complex, using stolen Federation explosives to destroy the antimatter processing facilities that powered their entire civilization. The explosion was visible from 3-star systems away, and the resulting shortage of antimatter fuel crippled Federation military operations across an entire sector on Altair Prime. Lieutenant Foster led a team of human refugees in an attack that violated every convention of civilized warfare. Instead of targeting military installations, they struck civilian infrastructure, power plants, communication arrays, and transportation hubs. When local authorities demanded to know why humans would attack non-combatants, Foster's reply sent shockwaves through the galactic community. "Because you support the genocide of our species," she broadcast on all frequencies. "Because your taxes pay for the ships that hunt our children. Because you vote for the leaders who declared war on us. You want to be civilians? Then stop participating in our extinction." The Federation had never faced an enemy that targeted the civilian populations of member worlds, and the psychological impact was devastating. Species that had joined the Federation for protection now found themselves under attack by desperate humans who had learned to strike at the foundations of galactic civilization itself. Admiral Corven, now commanding the largest military force in galactic history, found himself fighting a war that made no tactical sense. Every time his fleets destroyed a human stronghold, 3 more appeared in different systems. Every successful hunt led to retaliatory strikes against Federation civilians. Every victory seemed to spawn new defeats. "Admiral," his aide reported during a particularly frustrating briefing. The Altarian delegation is demanding immediate withdrawal of their forces from human space. They claim the war has become too costly and too dangerous for their civilian population. Corvin slammed his fist against the holographic display, sending tactical markers scattering like digital snow. The Altarians signed the war declaration. They committed their fleets to this campaign. They cannot withdraw now. But the political situation was deteriorating as rapidly as the military one. The Vegan Confederacy had already pulled their battle groups back to protect their home systems. The Centauri were threatening to leave the Federation entirely if the human attacks continued. Even species that had initially supported the war were beginning to question whether eliminating humanity was worth the cost in lives and resources. The breaking point came when Captain Stone's reconnaissance team discovered the Federation's central military command station hidden in the Rigel Nebula. The massive installation coordinated military operations across half the galaxy, its quantum computers processing tactical data from millions of sensors and directing the movements of thousands of warships. Any rational military commander would have reported the discovery and waited for a proper assault force to attack such a heavily defended target. Captain Stone had only 3 ships and 27 crew members facing a space station protected by an entire battle group. "Sir," his tactical officer pointed out, "we should fall back and report this to General Hayes. A proper attack would require at least 50 ships and extensive planning." Stone stared at the tactical display showing the Federation command station, its massive bulk bristling with weapons and shielded by defensive systems that could repel a fleet. But he also saw something else, an opportunity to cripple the Federation's ability to coordinate their genocide against humanity. "Negative," he replied. "We attack now. If we wait for reinforcements, they might relocate the station. This could be our only chance." The battle that followed lasted 18 hours and cost Stone his life along with his entire command. But when the human ships finally detonated against the command station's reactor core, the explosion destroyed the Federation's ability to coordinate their vast military forces. Suddenly, Federation fleets across the galaxy found themselves operating without central coordination. Supply lines broke down as automated systems failed. Battle groups lost contact with their commanders. The carefully orchestrated hunt for human survivors collapsed into chaos as individual ship captains were forced to make tactical decisions. Without strategic guidance, General Hayes received the news of Stone's sacrifice while planning what he knew would be humanity's final stand. The Federation had located his asteroid base and was sending overwhelming force to eliminate the last organized human resistance. Captain Stone's team accomplished more in 18 hours than our entire fleet has managed in 2 years, he told his assembled officers. "They've given us a chance, maybe the only one we'll get." The chance came in the form of a message from an unexpected source. Ambassador Liu, one of the few human diplomats to survive the war, had managed to establish contact with moderate elements within the Federation government. They were proposing something unprecedented, a ceasefire negotiation on neutral ground. "Sir," Lieutenant Morris reported, "Ambassador Liu is requesting permission to meet with Federation representatives on Kepler's Rest. She believes there may be a possibility for ending this war." Hayes looked around at his command center, noting the exhausted faces of his staff and the dwindling numbers on his tactical displays. Humanity was days away from complete extinction, but they had taught the galaxy a lesson about the cost of underestimating a desperate species. "Send word to Ambassador Liu," he decided. "Tell her she has authorization to negotiate, but also tell her something else. We don't surrender. We never surrender. If they want peace, they'll have to offer us something better than extinction." As the message traveled across the galaxy toward the neutral world where human and Federation representatives would meet, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The war had consumed entire star systems and claimed billions of lives on both sides. But perhaps, finally, someone was ready to try understanding instead of fighting. The question remained whether it was too late for understanding to matter. The neutral world of Kepler's Rest had been chosen for its isolation and its beauty, orbiting a binary star system so far from inhabited space that no species had ever claimed it. Its crystal formations caught the light from twin suns and threw it back in patterns that seemed to change depending on the observer's perspective, making it the perfect location for beings who needed to see things from different points of view. Ambassador Liu walked slowly through the translucent corridors of the meeting facility, her footsteps echoing strangely in the artificial atmosphere. She carried with her the weight of humanity's survival and the memories of 10 years of war that had nearly destroyed 2 civilizations. Her counterpart, Federation Counselor Viaran, waited in a chamber designed to accommodate the needs of multiple species. The counselor's appearance had been carefully chosen to avoid intimidating the human representative. Instead of the massive crystalline form that was his species' true shape, Viaran wore a humanoid projection that made conversation easier. But his eyes, ancient beyond human comprehension, held the wisdom and weariness of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Ambassador Liu, Viaran said as she entered the chamber, his voice carrying harmonics that the translation system rendered as profound sadness. I must confess that I hope never to meet under these circumstances. Liu took her seat at the curved table that dominated the room, noting how its surface seemed to shift and flow like liquid crystal. Counselor, 10 years ago, my people were farmers and engineers and teachers who had never heard of the Galactic Federation. Today we're refugees and guerrilla fighters who have learned to make war against civilizations we don't understand. I think we both hoped for different circumstances. The silence that followed carried the weight of billions of deaths and hundreds of destroyed worlds. Both representatives had lost friends and colleagues to a war that had spiraled beyond anyone's control or comprehension. Ambassador, Viaran said finally, I must ask you something that has troubled me throughout this conflict. Why do your people fight so hard? Any rational species would have recognized the futility of resistance and sought accommodation. Why do humans choose extinction over submission? Liu studied the alien's projected features, searching for the right words to explain something that even she didn't fully understand. Counselor, can I ask you something first? When the Federation decided to remove us from the Kepler Reserve, did anyone try to understand why we were there? The territory was clearly marked as reserved space, Viaran replied, confusion evident in his tone. Your species was violating established galactic law. Understanding was irrelevant. That's the problem, Liu said softly. You never asked us why we were there. You assumed we were there for the same reasons any other species would be: resources, territory, expansion for its own sake. But humans don't expand because we want to conquer space. We expand because we have to. She stood and walked to the chamber's transparent wall, looking out at the alien landscape painted in the light of twin suns. Counselor, do you know what happened to the last species that tried to confine humanity to a single world? I'm not familiar with the reference, Viaran admitted. We did it to ourselves, Liu explained. For most of our history, we were trapped on Earth by our own technology and our own limitations. Do you know what that confinement produced? Wars that consumed entire continents? Weapons capable of sterilizing our own planet? Social systems that oppressed billions while elevating a few? We nearly destroyed ourselves dozens of times. She turned back to face the counselor, her expression carrying the weight of species memory. We learned something about ourselves during those dark centuries. Humans who can't expand outward turn their energy inward, and when humans turn their destructive capabilities on themselves, everyone loses. We explore space not because we're aggressive, but because the alternative is self-destruction. Viaran's projection flickered as he processed this information. You're saying that human expansion is a survival mechanism rather than territorial aggression? Exactly. When you ordered us to evacuate the Kepler Reserve, you weren't just taking territory from us. You were trying to put us back in a cage that we'd spent centuries learning to escape. And then, when we tried to explain this through negotiation, you declared war on us. The counselor was silent for several minutes, his advanced mind working through the implications of what Liu had revealed. But surely you understood that you could not win such a conflict. The Federation has resources that dwarf your entire civilization. Liu's laugh carried no humor, only the bitter understanding that came from years of desperate struggle. Counselor, you still don't understand. We knew we couldn't win. We never expected to win, but we also knew we couldn't surrender. I don't comprehend the distinction. When humans face extinction, we don't calculate acceptable losses or negotiate terms of submission. We fight until we're dead, and we try to take as many of our enemies with us as possible. It's not rational, it's not strategic, and it's not even smart. But it's what we are. She sat back down, leaning forward across the crystal table. Your people have been trying to fight us like we're a normal military force that will surrender when losses become unacceptable. But we don't have unacceptable losses when we're fighting for survival. We have total losses or victory, nothing in between. Vren's projection shimmered as he struggled to understand a concept completely foreign to his species' way of thinking. You're describing a form of social insanity. No rational species would adopt such an approach to conflict resolution. You're right, Liu agreed. It is insane. But it's also why we're still talking to each other instead of you talking to my successor after I died in the latest failed attack on your forces. Counselor, in 10 years of war, how many human commanders have surrendered? How many human settlements have voluntarily submitted to Federation authority? The silence stretched between them as Veyron accessed his civilization's military records. The answer, when it came, carried the weight of terrible revelation. None, he whispered. In 10 years of warfare, not a single human unit has surrendered voluntarily. Now you're beginning to understand, Liu said. You declared war on a species. That doesn't surrender. Every battle you've won has cost you ships and lives that you can't replace. Every human you've killed has inspired 10 more to join the resistance. You've been trying to conquer people who would rather die than be anything other than human. Vron's projection flickered more rapidly as his consciousness struggled with concepts that challenged everything his species believed about rational behavior. But the cost to your own people has been enormous. Your entire civilization has been reduced to scattered refugees hiding in asteroid fields and abandoned systems. Yes, Liu acknowledged. We've lost almost everything. Our homeworld is occupied, our colonies are destroyed, our population has been reduced by 80%. By any reasonable measure, we should have been extinct years ago. Then why do you continue fighting? Liu stood again and walked to a different section of the transparent wall, where the light from the binary stars created patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Because we're still human, Counselor. As long as even one of us remains free, we carry the possibility of rebuilding everything we've lost. But if we surrender, if we accept Federation authority over our fundamental nature, then humanity dies even if our bodies survive. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from both of their respective commands. Veyron accessed his data stream through neural interfaces while Liu activated her portable communication device. Both received the same devastating news. The war had reached a tipping point that threatened to consume the entire galaxy. Ambassador, Veyron said, his voice heavy with new urgency, I'm receiving reports that human survivors have infiltrated the home systems of 6 Federation member species. They're threatening to detonate antimatter devices in populated areas unless all attacks on human refugees cease immediately. Liu closed her eyes as she absorbed similar reports from her own sources. General Hayes is reporting that Federation forces are massing for a final assault on our last stronghold. He estimates that organized human resistance will be eliminated within days. Both representatives understood what these reports meant. The war had reached the point where complete mutual destruction was only hours away. Either the Federation would succeed in exterminating humanity, or desperate human survivors would trigger a galactic catastrophe that would claim billions of innocent lives. Counselor, Liu said quietly, I need to know something before we go any further. If humanity agrees to stop all attacks on Federation civilians, can you guarantee that your forces will stop hunting our survivors? Vren's projection stabilized. as he focused on the question that would determine the fate of two civilizations. Ambassador, I must be honest with you. There are elements within the Federation who believe that human extinction is the only acceptable outcome. They argue that your species represents a permanent threat to galactic stability. And what do you believe? The counselor was silent for several minutes, processing not just Liu's question, but the entirety of their conversation and its implications for the future of the galaxy. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of a decision that would reshape interstellar civilization. I believe that the Federation has made a terrible mistake, he said. We declared war on a power we didn't understand, and we've learned the cost of that ignorance. Your species possesses qualities that could benefit the galaxy enormously, but only if we can find a way to accommodate your unique nature rather than trying to suppress it. Liu felt a spark of hope for the first time in years. What are you proposing? A complete cessation of hostilities, followed by formal recognition of humanity as a sovereign species with rights equal to any Federation member. In exchange, humans would agree to participate in a new form of galactic governance that acknowledges the diversity of species' needs and motivations. The proposal was radical beyond anything either civilization had considered before. It would require the Federation to abandon its assumptions about universal rational behavior, while humanity would need to trust a system that had tried to exterminate them. Counselor, Liu said carefully, assuming both sides can accept such terms, how do we convince our respective military forces to stop fighting long enough to implement them? Vron's answer came with surprising decisiveness. We broadcast this conversation to every ship, every station, and every world in Federation space. We let both sides hear exactly what we've learned about each other. Sometimes understanding is the only weapon powerful enough to end a war. The joint transmission that followed reached across the galaxy within hours, carried by quantum communication arrays that connected every inhabited system. For the first time in a decade, beings throughout the galaxy heard human and Federation representatives speaking to each other as equals rather than enemies. The armistice that followed wasn't perfect. Some Federation hardliners continued attacking human survivors for months afterward. Some human survivors continued their guerrilla campaigns against Federation targets. But gradually, as understanding replaced ignorance, the violence began to fade. General Hayes survived to see humanity's formal admission to the Galactic Federation as an equal member species. He often said in later years that the greatest victory wasn't winning the war, but surviving long enough to discover that the war had been unnecessary from the beginning. The galaxy bore scars from the conflict for generations afterward. Entire star systems remained uninhabitable, and billions of beings had died for reasons that seemed incomprehensible once the truth became known. But from those scars grew something unprecedented, a galactic civilization that celebrated diversity rather than demanding conformity. Humanity's unique approach to conflict resolution proved invaluable in subsequent crises. When other species faced existential threats, human advisors helped them find alternatives to surrender or extinction. The same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had nearly destroyed the galaxy became one of its greatest strengths. Ambassador Liu's final report on the peace negotiations contained a warning that became one of the most quoted passages in galactic diplomatic history. The galaxy declared war on a power they didn't understand. Let this be the last time any civilization makes that mistake. Understanding must come before judgment, and communication must precede force. The alternative is a darkness that consumes us all.